We're back. We're live. It's so good to be here with you, practical proficiency teachers. Thanks for having me hang out with you today. So, if you are new around these parts, because this group has grown exponentially, it is so exciting to see. What's up? My name's Devin, and I'm bringing some tea with me today because it's friggin' cold in my house. Not really. I'm just a little cold-blooded. And I am a former world language teacher, now an instructional coach and comprehensible input mentor with a bunch of tools to help you make your classroom practice more joyful, more sustainable, and proficiency oriented. And today, well, we do World Lang Wednesday every Wednesday, but I took a little break for the holidays to keep in line with, of course, what I proclaim for you is that breaks are good. So I'm trying to live by my own advice here. But we're back today and we're doing something a little bit different. I'm saying we, like there's more than one person here. It's just me and Ernie over there on the couch. But what I'm going to be doing today is a little bit off the cuff. Usually we talk about professional development topics, but we're going to do a little bit differently today. Today, I'm sharing my story with you about how I'm just going to be real, how I went from being somebody who was very much addicted to work and spending a lot of time in the classroom and working on plans, working on organization, working on everything that you can think of, to making that shift. And it wasn't subtle and it didn't happen, over time. It happened very much all at once, to going home on time. And I did that for a full year. And it was a rocky transition at first, but I ended up doing it every single day for a full year. And then when 2020 hit a little bit later on in the year, I also did it during COVID teaching, which, whatever kind of crap storm you want to call that. But I was asynchronous teaching at that time. And I also, from home, shut my laptop on time every day. So a lot of people ask me about this and are intrigued by what this is all about. So we're going to do something a little bit different today, in that I'm going to be telling you about what was the deal with all that and how I made that shift. Here, I'm going to make sure that we're logged in and that everything is rolling, that we're all hunky-dory. And why I think that sharing this story will be really helpful to you, because I know that, I don't know about you, but every time that I used to come back from a break, it would always be on the forefront of my mind. How can I work less? How can I work less? Because that break was so nice. But let's be real, it wasn't really a break. I was working the whole dang time, except for, maybe a few hours here and there, or maybe a nice fresh day with my family. And that's not really what this is meant to be, right? It was meant to be a break. So I didn't want to be a workaholic. Nobody ever wants to be. At least I would hope not. And if you're like me, maybe you don't realize that you are. For a long time, I didn't really realize that was what was going on in my life. All right, looks like we're good and that it is rolling. All right, I'm going to open this up. And then when 2020, don't even worry about that. All right, so I'm going to keep this open so that I can see comments and y'all rolling in. And I want you to let me know as you are rolling in. Let me know, what is your favorite warm drink to drink right now? I got some rooibos tea that I'm hanging out with right now. And I'm loving it. It is, makes my soul all warm. It's great. So we're just going to talk candidly. Usually I have some slides for you because we're talking about a very formal topic, but today's my story. So I thought that we would do something a little bit different. All right. You ready, folks? If you're on my newsletter, which if you're not, get there. The newsletter is where all the good haps are. And I do a weekly tip or something to help brighten your week, inspire you, help you get in that educator mindset, or to give you a specific thing to work on that week. And last week, I shared about how focusing in on curriculum was one of the major things that really helped me go from being a workaholic to going home on time. And this is really why, though, I got so focused in on curriculum and why curriculum became a huge part of what I do now in my career. So let me take you on a little journey. I started my teaching career in a medium-sized rural school that was pretty far from my house. And then I switched to a larger school, much closer to my house, that was amazing and I really loved, but it had a lot of demands on my time because of the large student population. And because of the fact that we were such a baller department, we had a lot going on and a lot that needed to be done. So it was one of those schools where it was definitely very easy to work all of the time. That was definitely a part of, I would say, the work culture as in education, is that it's kind of expected that you do a lot of work outside of school. So let me know in the comments below if you've ever felt that way, that most of your colleagues are not leaving on time. I know for me that it was definitely not what I experienced. A lot of people would stay late as well as me. But here's the problem. I would stay the latest. So I'll take lots of personal responsibility for that. I usually stay the latest. Not a good thing. And I found that because I loved planning, loved teaching, I loved making lessons. And I found a great deal of creative outlet in creating things for students, that I would find myself glued to my chair at 6 p.m. pretty often. And sometimes it was because I wanted to be there. And there were many times, however, like that was not the majority of times. There were many times, however, where I was glued to my chair or would bring the dreaded bag of shame home with me of papers upon papers upon papers of things to grade, of reports that I needed to complete for district requirements, all kinds of things. So let me know, have you ever been in this situation? You probably have been in this situation like 4 days ago, because I know that the workload has only increased with the demands of pandemic teaching. And the situation got pretty out of hand. It was to the point where I joke pretty often that the janitors all knew my name. The night shift janitors all knew my name because I used to stay at school so late. And it got to the point where I started to get used to driving home in the dark. I got used to missing dinners. I got used to all that. And I even scheduled my life around it. I knew exactly what time my daycare closed and what time I had to be there in order to pick my child up on time. And I knew what the late fee was because I picked my kid up late often so that I could work late. And still, even then, it didn't really register with me that there was a problem. When I knew that there was a problem was when, this is the hard part, was a few years into my job, because, I loved my job and I didn't really have a problem with staying late because I thought that's kind of what you had to do to be successful. Part of that came with, I was telling myself a story. Maybe you can see yourself in my story. I told myself a story that because of the demands of the education world, because of the demands of the teaching world, there is no way that I will be able to do this job unless I do these things. But that didn't explain how other teachers were going home on time. Then I replaced that story with, well, maybe you need to have a certain number of years of experience in order to go home on time. That was another story that I told myself. And the next story that I told myself as well was that, and this is really where the heart of it became evident, was the more that I worked, the more I deserved success. If I work more, my students will respect me more. If I work more, my administrators will realize how valuable I am to them. Can you see yourself in any of those? All false. Hardcore false. All hardcore false. It slapped me very much in the face how false these things are. If I work more hours, that is, if I have more innovative, more complicated lessons, then I will show my students how much I care about them. You ready for the slap in the face? This big giant bucket of cold water got dumped on me the first time a lesson bombed. My lessons don't usually bomb. They usually don't bomb. But I had one that I spent lots and lots of time on. It was an interactive game that I spent a lot of time creating all of the intricate pieces, making stations and things like that. And there was a logistical piece missing from the game where, you know, one piece didn't match up to this next piece. And because of it, the whole thing fell apart and couldn't really be recovered. It was one of those logistical situations. And I don't even remember all the details of it, but it was one of those things where like something in station one didn't work. So like all of the other stations wouldn't work. It's like something wrong with the numbers. They didn't line up properly. I don't remember what it was. Point of the story being, I spent a long time putting that game together so that it would last a whole block class, 90 minutes. You all know what that's like if you teach block. Came in and set everything up, cut everything out, lined everything up so it was good to go and, you know, easily student accessible, all that good stuff. And it bombed, totally bombed because the logistics were missing. And as I watched this lesson go down in flames and all the students trying to figure it out, all confused, Miss Gunning, this doesn't work. Miss Gunning, this doesn't work. This number's not in the right place. I lost it. I absolutely lost it. And who got the brunt of it? They did. I said, I said something along these lines. How do you not appreciate how much work I put into this? How do you not see how much thought and care went into this lesson? They all looked at each other like, is she crazy? Yes, I was. Because here is the real giant bucket of ice water that was splashed all over my face. Students do not care how much time I put into lessons. They don't. You know what they equate care with? How you treat them. Whether your lessons are relevant to them, whether they speak to their real life experiences. Time does not equal love or care. Work and effort also do not equal love or care. They don't. You know what does? Effectiveness. You know what does? Things that make them happy, things that make them smile, things that make them feel seen. And that doesn't have to come from me. The next day, I made something simpler. And the day after that, I found something from somewhere else. I think I made something quick off of an authentic YouTube video or something like that. And my students loved it. They were so much kinder to me, and I could see the mutual respect relationship happening so much more. So my question to you is, if you have ever felt like me, if you've ever been in my shoes before, where you feel that if you put more time and more effort and more work into your lesson plans, that you deserve more respect from your students, that you deserve more respect from the leaders, administrators, authority, whatever's in your work environment, your school district, insert place of work here. If you feel deep in your heart that your value as a teacher is determined by the number of hours in your seat, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong because that is a very, very, very fast slide to burnout. It's a very fast slide to burnout. And you would think that even with that experience that I would have learned my lesson, but I didn't. I didn't. It took a health crisis for me to learn that lesson because I was still addicted to work, which came from a very profound place of addiction. But back to what I know is probably true for some of you if you are watching this class, is that you resonate with this idea that, oh my gosh, I know that I'm spending a lot of time at work and I know that I want to leave earlier and I just don't know how. And you might, if you're like me, maybe you've turned to at some point productivity hacks. Maybe you've turned to organizational hacks. Maybe you believe something along the lines of, if I just had a cleaner classroom, if I were just more organized, if I spent less time having to grade papers, if I had to spend less time doing administrative tasks, that I would be able to go home on time. And I want to tell you something that might shock you, that might be a little bit different from many other people out there in the teaching environment, but you need to hear this and you should take it from somebody who has been there and who has suffered a great deal because of burnout and because of a health crisis directly related to burnout that forced me to leave my teaching job. And I can no longer go back to the classroom because of the effects of that health crisis. I miss it a lot. Is that your self-worth will never be tied to the amount of work that you do. You are worthy because you are a human being and because you love your kids. Because you love your kids and you don't need to work for that. You know what matters more is showing your kids that you love them. And that does not come from the amount of hours that you spend at your chair. It doesn't come from the amount of effort that you spend to make their classroom experience great. You can do that in a shorter amount of time, and it will say absolutely nothing about how much they mean to you. Something else that's really important for you to understand is that your workload will only ever increase. That we know to be true. We have seen that in education, and I've heard it from so many different educators from all different backgrounds and all different age groups as well. Many teachers who started 30 years ago are astounded by the things that teachers are asked to do nowadays. Many teachers who are starting now are asking themselves, what did I get myself into? And there are also people who are astounded by just the amount of work differences that are occurring in the field of education from 3 years ago to now. And even in the different stages that you've experienced in the classroom of the different roles and waves of what the pandemic has done to your classroom, how much that has affected your workload. The workload is only ever going to increase because it does every year. So what can we do as people who love the field of education? What can we do? This is the thing that helped me go home on time for a whole year, despite all of the turbulences. I learned, and so can you, that going home on time has nothing to do with being crazy organized. Well, I shouldn't say nothing, that is definitely involved, but has far less to do with being organized and having a productivity hack or understanding a great deal about pedagogy. The number one thing that I've noticed about teachers who are able to go home on time, experience also is irrelevant in this because you can do this as a first and second and third year teacher. You can grow into this role, is that there's an essential shift that happens, a monumental shift that happens. Teachers that go home on time are not faster workers, are not more organized. They are prioritized. They are expert decision makers. They make decisions quickly and intelligently about what is the most important thing to them. And the way that I was able to make this work for me was after 2 years of being a workaholic, a real tragedy occurred in my family, like a low down, no good, real tragedy, something real heartbreaking. And I couldn't deal with it. It was so heartbreaking that I could not deal with it. So I chose not to deal with it. I decided that this is a problem I could not solve. So I will solve the problems that I can. I'll solve my classroom problems. And I became even worse. And I stayed even longer at work, even though I'd already experienced that lesson of like, it doesn't matter what my students are they care about the quality of the lessons, not how much time and attention I put into them. And it became a real problem where I was definitely escaping a lot of the problems that I needed to dig into, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready for it. So I dug into work. But the body holds the scars and the body remembers, and my body shut down. And this is where the whole burnout happened. One day in March, maybe 2 years ago, honestly, don't even remember the year now. It's been a long time, maybe 2.5 years ago. I left work a little bit early with a headache, bad one. And it grew, and then it just never went away. And it got so bad that I couldn't go back to work. It got diagnosed as a migraine. I had to go to the emergency room and all kinds of things. And I'll spare you all the nitty gritty details, but I ended up spending 4 weeks at home. 4 weeks at home with something called an intractable migraine that I still take medication for. And so if you're a migraine sufferer, I know your life very well. And coming back to work was not easy either. I was not at all well enough to go back to work, but hey, I ran out of days. Y'all know what that's like. I ran out of days, so I had to go back, even though I wasn't really well. And I had to teach for the rest of the year with the lights off because I had light sensitivity. And I also had to ask my students to whisper. They weren't really allowed to talk very loud. And oh man, I could barely manage the classroom because I couldn't really get up and move around them that much. It was a disaster. But it was 3 months of highly restricted, really, really sad teaching. A lot of worksheets, which y'all know is really not my style. It was hard. It was hard, doesn't really even cover it, y'all. Let's be honest. It was soul crushing. It was soul crushing. Going from being a really excellent teacher to being a worksheet teacher who taught in the dark while my students whispered to me and were definitely all over the place and out of control because I couldn't get out of my seat to help them. Soul crushing. Maybe you know what that's like. You ever felt like you were teaching with your hands tied? Maybe you felt like that the year that you're experiencing now. I know a lot of you have experienced something similar to that, teaching roomies and zoomies and all of the really hard things that you've experienced that COVID has done to your classroom. So it's not exactly the same thing, but I empathize deeply with that feeling of teaching with your hands tied. It was very hard. It was so soul crushing that I quit. I just couldn't. I couldn't. I couldn't. But I spent the summer after that, after I quit that year, saying to myself, as I was looking for other jobs, I can't leave teaching. I love teaching. I love teaching. Plus, that's what I needed to do for my family situation. So I had a real life moment. And the life moment was, I can't be the same person and go back to the classroom because I know what that looks like for me now. So I went to therapy and I began to unravel and deal with the tragedy that had happened in my family. I started to meditate, which I still do almost every morning. Love it. I got way more into exercise, into ritual exercise. I got way more into healthy eating habits and hydration and all those things and healthy everything that you could think of. And the most important shift that happened for me, though, is that I made a vow at the beginning of the year is that I would give myself 1 week in August to go get my classroom together and I could stay late, but the rest of the year I needed to prioritize my brain, my health, and repairing the family relationships that I had damaged along the way. So I knew before I accepted a different teaching job, which I decided to go to a different school, not because I really wanted to go back to my old school. But one of the decisions I made is I chose intentionally a school that was much smaller and had far fewer demands on my time, much smaller program, much more freedom, that kind of thing. So I moved to a new school that had a lot less demands on my time. And I knew this is the year that I'm going to go home on time every single day, except for the first few days where I got my classroom, settled in together since I was moving to a new school. And I did. I went home every single day on time not because I wanted to, because I didn't have a choice. My health was in shambles. I was a shattered human. And it was really hard. It was really hard. I'm not going to lie to you. There were many days where I had to stop before my door and say to myself, who am I serving today? I'm going to go into this classroom, even though I don't feel good. And I'm going to give those kids the best that I got. And it was really hard. Oof, I'm getting choked up. It was hard. But I want to share this with you because I know that there's probably a lot of you out there who have felt this way before, who have done something like this. Oof. Who have had those really hard years. You're probably going through it right now. This is a hard year for a lot of you. So this is not easy for me to share, but I know maybe some of you need to hear it. Whew. Give me a minute. It's getting real in here. So what I need you to hear from this, though, is that because I knew that I was going into battle every single day, that it was the hardest decision ever to go home on time every day. Like that was a battle. That was really hard because I didn't want to. I was still attached to the idea that if I spent more time at school, that my kids would have a better experience and that I would be able to serve them better. That took a long time for me to shed that idea about myself. But you know what happened? The first 2 months were really rough. I'm not going to lie to you. I will be very real with you because y'all are my people, you're in my group, and you need to know the truth. When you make this shift, it's not really about what happens in your classroom. It's about what happens in your mind. There's a lot of internal work that needs to happen to make this shift because, again, it doesn't really have that much to do with principles about how to be a faster, more organized, more expert teacher. It has to do with being brave, with being a brave decision maker. So every day I had to be brave enough to look at my list and say, dang, all of this needs to be done. All of this is important, but I'm being asked to do too much. My students know it, and I know it, and my administrators know it, but they don't have any control over it, and neither do I. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make that shift. I'm going to be an expert decision maker because I don't have a dang choice. If I don't go home on time, I'm going to have another health spiral and I will not be able to return to class tomorrow, or, I'll be out for another few weeks. So it was do or die for me. So this is what happened. It was hard for me at first, but slowly but surely every day when I went home at 4:00, sometimes I would go into school the next morning and I'd be like running around trying to get everything ready for the next lesson because I wasn't used to that. I was used to having like a nice, luxurious runway to the next day, like 2 full hours. Have everything ready, la, 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 all the good stuff. I was so used to not worrying about what I was teaching tomorrow until it was 4:30 and I was done all my emails. and done all my grading. And then I could, like browse through and like pick what I wanted. And like, trust me, I was a very fast, efficient person, but it took a long time for me to get to that switch of you don't have time to play around. You don't have time to be fancy. You got to get things done, even if they're not perfect. So I started slowly but surely to see a shift in how I approached planning and in how I approached decision making about my class. It would become things like, all right, let's do lesson planning for a whole week and see if that's faster than what is going on now. And that's where I really started to get into the idea of, okay, curriculum's real, curriculum's serious. I need to take more. I need to do more stuff with curriculum because this is saving me a lot of time. And then I started to learn and see that when I had to go home at 4:00, it was a lot easier to make decisions about what people asked me to do. Students would ask me to do extra tutoring, and the no would just roll off my tongue so fast I wouldn't even think about it. They would say, can you tutor me at 4:30? And I would say, no, ma'am, but you can come in during your lunch. And then the conversation became very different. Whereas 2 years ago, I would say, of course, what time do you need to be there? Can I help you with transportation? No, ma'am, but I can tutor you through your lunch break and I'm happy to give up mine. What do you need? It's the same level of service, but it's a very different approach to my time outside of school. And it also became really evident to me how ruthless I needed to be about my time outside of school when it came to meetings with even within my district, with things that were asked of me, emails and all kinds of time commitments outside of school. Really easy to say no to, really easy. When before I was worried about, making people upset or making waves. There were several staff meetings that I asked, do I need to be here for this? Could you send me the information in an email? I can't actually make this. And the reason was because I needed to go home at 4:00. And my administrators were so happy to accommodate me because they knew about my health. And they would say, you know what? Here are the things that you need to know. Go ahead and go home for the day. It's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So you'd be surprised what happens when you have the the fortitude to ask, I guess I should say. Now, I know that that's not possible for everybody. You might be saying to yourself, that's not the situation in my school. And I'm going to say something to you. I thought the same thing. Ask, what's the worst that could happen? They say no. Your next question might be, what if they say no? And my question to you is, what if they say no? What's going to happen? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You need to be a ruthless decision maker if you want to see changes in your life. You might also be saying to this story, well, your school situation is different than mine. Your workload might be different than mine. And I'm going to say to you, that's probably true. But here's something that's universal to all teachers. We have all felt the pressure to do more and to be more in a time where we need more. And when you serve yourself and take care of your own health, you actually become a better teacher and a better decision maker. Here's what actually happened when I started to go home on time every day. I became really good at planning lessons in 30 minutes or less. I used far less resources because I didn't have time for the broken copier at my school. So I found a way to work around it and invested my time in digital resources so that I wouldn't ever have to use it because it was so frustrating and would drive me crazy. So my shift, and you can think of something in your school because there might be something similar, but maybe it has to do with computers for you. But for me, the school that I worked at, the copier was awful. So I said to myself, what are the ways that I can eliminate paper in my lesson? And that shift saved me a lot of time because it used to be a lot of, like pulling things out of the copier. But that's a tangential example, but just so that you can think of something in your life. You might be saying to yourself, what's a way that I can check email only 5 times during the school day instead of 10 times? That's something that you could definitely look into. But the number one thing that I want you to know is that it was not at all easy for me to make this transition. It was brutal. It was all at once, and it took a lot of guts. And the reason that I was able to do it was because I knew that I had no other option. It was do or die for me. And there is a happy ending to the story in that after a year of going home on time, I had a significant improvement in my health, and I now enjoy a much healthier experience now. I feel better than I ever have in my whole life. And part of that has to do with now I get to hang out with you full time, supporting you behind the scenes. And part of what I feel is my responsibility to you is that you understand that one of the reasons why I chose to step into this new role of being a curriculum coach to being a teacher self-care advocate is because I suffered a great deal by my own hand, like 20% because of the amount of work that teachers are asked to do, but mostly by my own hand of how much work that I put on myself because I believe some very untrue things about teaching. And it took something as drastic as a health crisis to help unravel that thinking for me. Without that, I would probably be doing the same things in the new career that I have now. But one of the main reasons that I chose to not go back into the classroom is because I know of that lingering unhealthy relationship that I have with classroom teaching. And this is a much better space for me. But I hope that this will not be true for you, that you can learn from what I successfully did for a year as well, that you can learn to unravel the things that we tell ourselves. If you identify as a teacher workaholic, the things that we identify about ourselves, that your workload is not tied to your worth, that you are a great teacher for so many other reasons. And most of them have to do with how brave you are in your classroom, how much love and empathy that you show, and the dedication that you show to your work, which is not at all correspondent with the amount of hours that you spend there. You can be an incredibly effective teacher. I was more effective in the classroom when I went home on time. It was a lot of different factors, but I was more efficient. I was more well rested. And I was happier. The main reason I was more effective in the classroom after I started going home on time, and I think will be effective for you as well, is because the hardest part about teaching for me was being patient enough for the day to day, for the minute to minute interactions and the social needs of my students. My students were very demanding of my energy. I always thought they were demanding of my time, but they really wanted my attention and my energy. And I was never fully able to give it to them. I was always kind of snippy, never really fully present with them. But when I knew that I only had this finite amount of time to be with them, their class period, I was fully theirs for that class period. And it was so much easier for me when I knew I'm going home on time today. I'm going home and I'm going to rest. I'm not going to talk about my day at work. I'm going to leave it at work. I'm not bringing home anything with me. I'm leaving it at work. I'm going to have a full weekend of being me and investing in other parts of my life that have nothing to do with teaching because I'm more than a teacher. And then on Monday, I'm going to do it again. That feeling was so different from, I'm going to be here for 12 hours. I'm also going to be grading things on the weekend. It's not an easy choice. It's not. But it is a choice. Both of them are hard, but you can choose your hard. This was not an easy story for me to share. Part of me is very afraid that you might know far too much about me, but also that you might know just how hard it was for me to continue to be a teacher and the effect that it had on my life. But I'm sharing it because I think that maybe you can see a little bit of yourself in me and you can learn from it, and that you can also be inspired by the fact that I overcame it, and I climbed out of the hole and I became a much better person for it, and that I had the best, most joyous year of teaching that I've ever had. even in weird circumstances, the year that I went home on time. So what can you learn from this? Do you see yourself in my story? Does your year look like this? Has it ever looked like this in the past? I would love to know what you think of it. And thank you so much for being here with me and having patience with my moments and for being a part of my community. I really appreciate every single one of you. And I also have to tell you that I am completely cleaned out. Y'all bought all my planners and I have to make a lot more. So usually there is it's perfectly part of this class is part of my teacher self-care planner, because self-care is the key to good teaching, as this class demonstrates. But I'm fresh out because you guys really showed up and supported me, which is awesome. And I hope that you get to see that the planner was really a labor of love from my experiences in the trenches. And what I found to be the most effective way to teach is really by taking care of you, because you are the leader of the classroom and you care about every single soul that steps into your class. So take care of you, and all of those people will be taken care of as well. Remember that the essential shift to going from working all the time to going home on time has very little, if you learn nothing else, it has very little to do with how efficient you are. You're already efficient. With how good of a teacher you are. You're already a great teacher. It has nothing to do with any kind of tricks that you can learn. The only thing that you can do right now to start going home on time is to be a good decision maker, to prioritize the number one thing that you need to get done that day, or maybe two, maybe three, but that's stretching it. And to prioritize above all else the promise that you make to yourself that, insert time here, 4:00 is 4:00. Being a brave decision maker is the difference. I hope that you learned something from class today, and I can't wait to see you next week. Bye, y'all.